Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Good Stuff. I'm your host, Kevin Bille, and as always, we are very happy for you to join us today and spend some time with us. Remember to head on over to YouTube, hit that subscribe button when you get a chance. Good Stuff with Kevin, and you can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Well, I'm looking forward to today's guest. As always, we're gonna learn a ton from this guy. He is a former assistant general manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates. I want to welcome to the show, Kyle Stark. Kyle, it's good to have you.
Good to be here.
I went home at lunch today, I just want you to know, and my two boys, the oldest, 13 and 11, were asking more about you. And wouldn't you know, like a week ago, we just watched Moneyball, and I said, hey, man, that's just Jonah Hill I'm interviewing today. So that's who it is, right?
Everybody can relate to some level in the front office because of that book, that movie.
Well, how does a volleyball guy go to baseball, and kind of what impacted your move in that process from front office over to coaching, or over coaching, if you will, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up, played every sport, and always was a baseball guy. Just loved baseball, loved the game. Dreamed growing wanting to play in the big leagues, and I was better at volleyball, relatively speaking. So when I realized I wasn't going to be able to play at the next level in baseball, I knew I wanted to be involved with the game, and so that became my focus. What did that look like? The timing of that was such that baseball is going through a unique transition with the Moneyball, actually, and some of the things in terms of getting more notoriety of the front office. So knew I wanted to go that route. At the time, coaching in pro ball wasn't necessarily an option for guys that hadn't played at that level, and that became the focus, was being able to go in the front office. Grew up coaching, passionate about coaching. Starting at 13, coaching, working camps with the younger kids in order to go to camps and those types of things. And so a number of different sports, boys, girls, all different levels, from 5-year-olds up to obviously professional players now, and just the ability to impact individuals on their journey, and using sport to help shape character and everything else has been a passion. So fortunate through my career in baseball to be able to kind of mix all those things together.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, hey, you started spending some time right away with my favorite team, Cleveland. I just would like to know, we talked about Bob DiBiasio, and I was kind of always picking his brain as a coach, but it was obvious to me what the culture was. But what do you feel in your time there, and just in general, of continually staying in touch with these guys in your life? Like, what makes the Indians so special?
Yeah, I'd say probably three things. I think one is the quality of the people, right? I mean, there were world class people there. There still are world class people there. Before I got there, John Hart is GM. He developed a ton of guys that went on became GMs, and then I was fortunate to be there when Mark Shapiro was there, and Chris Antonetti, Mike Chernoff, those guys. John Farrell was there, Ross Atkins. I mean, guys that have gone on, to do a lot in the game. So I think the first part is just the quality of the people, and that was in the office. I mean, there are a ton of really good men as scouts and coaches. So I think that was a commonality. I think the second one was that they, by nature, because it was a small market team, a lot of opportunity. They wanted to develop people. They wanted people to be creative, to figure out how to solve problems, find competitive advantages. And so I was able to go in there and be able to be exposed to not only people, but a ton of opportunity to be able to fill gaps and learn, and be able to promote some different things. And then I think the third thing is that just because it's a small market, because you're looking for competitive advantages, the other part of it's how's everything interact, how's everything connect, right? And so rather than being put in a specific spot and being locked into that, was able to interact with a lot of different groups, a lot of different people, and feed off of some of those different connections, relationships.
Well, and I'm sure adding Terry Francona to the mix is always a good recipe too to help out the culture. But yeah, it's been good. We're spoiled over here, even though we haven't gotten the big one. And I don't want to talk about my attendance at Game 7 still to this day. But they still got it going on. But then you head over to Pittsburgh. I would say, am I correct in saying, like, when I got to Notre Dame College and they were 9-49, 0 and overall, and 0-30 in the league, I was the only dumb enough guy to take the job. Where does one start, in your role and with the others in terms of creating a vision, a culture, a buy-in, when taking over something, relatively speaking, from the bottom?
Yeah. Well, and I think the first part's to identify with the situation that we were inheriting. I remember this day. I mean, ESPN ran articles about, hey, this is a 10-year rebuild, if at all, even if it's possible, just because the big league team had not been good for a while. Small market club as well. Minor league system was not good, so there were not ingredients there to say, hey, we're inheriting a good situation necessarily. But I remember talking to a couple people, and they're like, look, as far as opportunities go, I mean, I was a 28-year-old chance to go run a minor league system. So, Neil Huntington believed in me, gave me that opportunity. So in my mind, I was probably dumb enough. But in my mind, it's like, right, a no-brainer opportunity wise. But I think when you go in, I talked to a number of different people before going in there, and, everybody's got some different thoughts and opinions. I think the common theme was, hey, use this first year to kind of assess what have you got, whatever else. That's not my personality. I'm not wired that way.
Oh, I get it.
And so from day one, it was going to be, hey, this is where we're going. This is how we're going to get there. Here are the core guiding principles we're going to hold fast to. And I did that because I didn't want to wait. I wanted to get some of these things in place, but I also wanted to see what we had. And I didn't feel like by just watching for a year, I was going to necessarily get a true read of who could fit, who didn't fit, whatever else. And when you're talking about overseeing a staff of 70, 75 coaches and then, 150 to 200 players, I just felt like it was important from day one to set a tone of what mattered to us, what we were going to focus on, and see who responded and how they responded so that we could then build from there.
And I got to think it's tough for people, at least in this position. I'll be vulnerable enough to admit it, that there's such a balance when you come into a situation like that, having a great deal of conviction. And like you said, hey, this is the standard. This is where we're going, establishing that culture and the daily discipline to have those habits day in and day out. But then doing a complete overhaul because you haven't earned the trust yet of your people. So therefore, when you don't have the trust, you don't have the buy-in. So I got to think that's probably a tough balance to find for leaders that are listening. Correct?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge, and I think probably even more so when you factor in young guy coming in. We were going to do some things that were a little bit outside the box in terms of tradition, how things were done. And I probably was naive to that a little bit. I remember having this conversation over and over my first year where, I'd say, hey, we're going to do it this way. And the response I'd get quite a few times is, well, that's not how we've done it here.
Yeah.
And I said, we are aware that we haven't won in 15 years here, and there's a new regime here for a reason. But I think what I tried to do was try to connect the things that we were doing, the principles that we were doing to excellence, for people to be able to identify and say, hey, that makes sense. I've seen that other places, or maybe I've experienced that in other places. But then also to drive home that, hey, anybody here can be a part of this. This isn't, this was not going to be a, hey, we're bringing in, because you can't bring in your guys. You watch in football where you bring in your staff. Baseball, that both because of inability to just go bring significant numbers of people in. But then the other challenge that you have is just it's just much bigger operation. So to try to make very clear that, hey, this is less about people fit here and more about, hey, can we find some alignment on some ideas here? And if so, then this is going to be a great fit for you. If it's not, I'm not going to take it personal. There's probably a better fit for those individuals.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to dive into kind of these three buckets of culture, which I've heard you talk about before, but I'd be interested just to know, when you have that many people in terms of the coaches and the farm systems, How does one get a consistent message and language across all of that? Is that an off-season meeting where everybody's in house, and then once you're in season, I think of maybe people that are listening to this, they want a commonality with their message, and it's so difficult to get that consistently day in, day out. So would you have any advice or input in your experience in dealing with that could help somebody listening to this?
Yeah, I think over the years, it's kind of crystallized for me. There's probably three big buckets in terms of how you get that done. I think the first part's the clarity piece, right? If it's not clear for me, if I don't have enough clarity for what matters, then how can I expect somebody else to? So the work on the front end to ensure clarity for myself as a leader, and I think a lot of times we trick ourselves as leaders to think that we are clear. But if we challenge ourselves or we talk to somebody else and they're like, wait, what do you mean by that? Then we're probably not clear
Right,
enough. So
right.
I think the work on the front end to ensure clarity for myself. The second part is then to, identify some key movers and shakers for you, whether that's your core leadership team, whether that's, hey, key influencers in the structure. Sometimes those are formal leadership positions, sometimes they're not. We had when I stepped in, one of the staff members that I inherited, the clubhouse at Pirate City was named after this guy. He'd been a pirate for 50 years, for 40 years, or whatever else. So while he wasn't in a significant leadership position anymore, that's a key influencer. I got to
Yeah,
make
right.
sure that guy's on board. So identifying those and then investing time with those guys to make sure that there's alignment. Because if there's
Yeah,
not alignment, where you're going to be fighting some things, but then to ensure clarity with them, right?
yeah.
So that they can go forth. And then I think the third part of it is just, it's as a leader, it's consistent. Every single opportunity is a teaching opportunity. So the consistency of my actions. I mean, you touched on it earlier in terms of where you don't necessarily have buy-in on the front end when you first come in the door. People are watching to see whether they want to buy in or not. And so, are my actions reinforcing what I'm saying? Are people watching and going, "Wow, he really does believe what he's saying," and I'm starting to see where this is going. But then the other part of the consistency of just being consistent as a teacher is to recognize that every interaction I have is an opportunity to reinforce a principle.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we see every situation as a transaction or a situation, just an isolated incident to tackle and move on as a leader, as opposed to saying, hey, I can teach our culture through this situation if I'm intentional enough about it.
Yeah, that's good. I think there's just a lot of from my point of view when I hear that or just seen some of those things when I've read them, it just the consistency is crucial, and then your ability just to continue to connect and connect and connect. That's huge. So these
Well, and
bucket. Go ahead.
I think just to jump in too on that consistency piece, this is one our leader team would talk a ton about. I think a lot of time, especially in pro sports, especially probably in male sports, but I think just today in North America, United States, there's such a focus on intensity, right? In terms of how significant of an event, how significant of a, we're work harder, we're, whatever those things may be, and not enough recognition on the consistency piece. And
Yeah.
we need both. It's not an either or thing, but the consistency piece is ultimately when you measure greatness, it's a consistency thing, right?
Yep.
When you say, hey, how much are we going to bet on this individual to perform at a high level? It's a consistency piece, and we would talk often about it from a player standpoint, but it applies to us as leaders as well in terms of, hey, you want to be great, go be good every day.
Yeah.
You want to be good, go be just solid every day.
Yeah.
But it's that consistency piece that separates. And I think as a leader, we can make specific moments very significant. And I've joked with guys about the conference experience, right? We had a great conference, where we had a great church service, where we had a great whatever else, and then we go live our week and recognize that those follow-ups, that consistency is ultimately the separator.
Yeah, it's so crucial. It's really hard to do. Once you know what that thing is, it's really hard to do it, right? I mean, I've said it on here probably a dozen times, maybe one time the last 10 or 11 episodes in a row now. Not so concerned about what it takes to be successful. I want to hear how to sustain it, because it's hard. And along the way, I don't know about you with your kids, but I kind of tell my kids sometimes you got to embrace boredom. Sometimes this process is boring, but if you can do that over and over, chisel to the rock, keep chopping that wood, you're good to go. Dive in a little bit to these buckets of culture that was established, these three P's, if you will, and why did it work?
Yeah. So I think, culture is obviously a buzzword. one of the things I've realized as I've continued to lead and spend time with people on leadership, the buzzwords are buzzwords for a reason because they do matter. And I think sometimes we fight the buzzword because we don't like the buzzword. What we really don't like is the vagueness of the buzzword, right? We don't like
Yeah,
it
yeah.
when someone hides behind a concept that we don't really understand. And I think culture is a perfect example of that. If you look at anybody who is successful, first of all, we all have a culture, right? I mean, it's not a matter of whether, I'm a culture guy. Well, we all have culture. And culture is ultimately a mix of our people and our habits, our behaviors, how we go about doing things. So we all have a culture. The best are very intentional at cultivating it as opposed to haphazardly ending up with one, right? And so for us, it was going to be a matter of we're going to define what culture is and specifically identify the components of it. So there's clarity so that we can go be consistent in how we execute them.
For
And
sure.
and the three buckets we ended up with kind of simple. I'll start with P for us to remember. I'm not a very smart guy. I try to keep things as simple as I can. And so that first one is that idea of pursuit. Where are we going? What is our identity going to be? What's our purpose? Why do we exist? Do we have some clarity on this journey we're on? Why we're doing it, where we're
Mhm.
going.
And,
The
and
second
if you
one,
don't mind, Kyle, can I?
yeah,
I should have prefaced this. I'm sorry. I'm going to interject with each one if I have something.
okay,
Just if you don't like,
perfect.
where does just because I think this is I love these, and I won't give up the other two yet. But this pursuit, how much in there is optimism and realism? And like
Yeah,
what you really truly can be as the Pittsburgh Pirates. Like, like I remember, I think it was my second year. We were 14 and 15, and after the year, somebody said to me, a mentor, 70-year-old, came. He said, "Man." He said, "You'll never ever have another year as good as that year." And I thought he was nuts, But then I told you understand what I'm saying though. So in
yes,
that pursuit, if
yes.
people are struggling with that and how to get to that optimism, realism, how do they approach that?
Yes, I think it is. It's you just hit it. It's that tension of both, right? It's not an or thing; it's an and thing. And so, one of the things that we would talk a lot about is the Stockdale Paradox. Jim Collins talked about it in Good to Great. Admiral James Stockdale, prisoner of war. They asked him, "Hey, those of you who got out, those of you who survived, what was the secret?" And he said, well, it was not the pessimists because they had no hope. There's nothing to keep them going, so that they gave up. Eventually, he said it wasn't the wide-eyed optimists because they're like, hey, we're going to get out by the 4th of July. Well, that came and went. We didn't get out. Well, we're going to get out by fall. Well, that came and went. And they didn't get out. Well, Thanksgiving came and went. Christmas. At some point, if we're holding on to that hope without any substance to it, that doubt starts to creep in. And he said, so those who survived had a combination of they embraced the brutal facts of reality, so that would be
Right.
your realists, but they also had an unwavering belief that you're going to prevail. And
Mhm.
I would have conversations with one of our key leaders because he would say, "Hey, pessimists are right more often than optimists." And I told him, I said, I'm not interested in being right. I'm interested in trying to change the world here. So at the end of the day, this pursuit is something significant enough that yeah, the odds are stacked against you. So we have to have an unwavering belief we're going to prevail, and that needs to be rooted in something. That can't be some Pollyanna
Mhm.
type thing. But at the end of the day, the only way we're going to get better, the only way we're going to be able to move things forward, the only way that we're going to be able to achieve those things is if I'm brutally honest with what I'm dealing with.
Right.
And so I think it's that great leader embraces both of those
Yeah.
things
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And I think there's a mindset included in there, which I would say all the time. And then, to our text back and forth the last 24 hours, the obstacles away, right? I mean, it's dealing with
Yeah.
that adversity, it's being resilient. The next one that you go into, number two, is people. Talk to us a little bit about people, and I'm sure I'll have a follow-up question here if you don't mind.
Yeah. So the people thing is again, at the end of the day, that's your greatest asset, right? And I think everybody says that. I think the key is do your actions, do your programs, do all those things really line up with that? And so it's recognizing that people were going to be our greatest asset, and then how are we going to move that forward? So really, that comes down to kind of three pieces. There's the selection piece, which by nature I'm a development guy, so I, especially early, probably spent less time on the selection side because I'm like, hey, I'll be able to coach this guy and get this guy better. And while that may be true, you know, where we're starting from, who we've got there can significantly make that journey way easier and potentially have a greater upside. So the selection piece and being clear in terms of what you're looking for and how do you navigate that, which is could be a whole nother topic. The development piece on how do you get them better, because it's not enough just to get people in the door. Because we talk about, hey, you're either growing or you're dying. There's no third direction. So we want to keep trying to get the most out of our people, maximize our people, which means we're creating a culture of growth, of improvement. And then the third piece is how do we make sure we're developing a culture where there's unbelievable coordination, where we're a great team, where we work together really well. Because it's the whole idea of 2 + 2 can equal 4, or 2 + 2 can equal 5 or 6. If I've created a special culture, where those bonds get the most out of each other. And so that's kind of a broad look at how we looked at people.
Now, I know you had some of those people, like you said, in place already, but you also had to bring in free agents at one point. You also had to hire new people. So for people that are listening to this in similar positions, how did you go about those? To me, I would say it's got to be a fit. For us to hire somebody here at Plain Values, it's all about the fit. So how did you go about that?
Yeah, so I would agree. I think one thing that I probably grew on was the idea of evolving that term of fit to be, I wanted someone who's going to advance the culture, not just fit in the culture. Because I was the same way. It was all about fit, all about fit. And at the end of the day, what crystallized for me was, no, we want people who are going to take this culture and make it better, which is part of what fit is, right?
Yeah, right.
Because ultimately we're looking for a difference maker person. So I think we've got to define fit. That's where that clarity piece comes in again. Do I really know what are the things that matter most? I think a lot of times we say, hey, we've got clarity, and then we list 15 things, 15 commitments. Do I have clarity on what really matters so that I can go have a sniper focus and look for it? If I know what I'm looking for, I've got a better chance of identifying when it's there. I think the second part of it then becomes, do I have a process in place? Actually, before that, the second part of it comes into, do I really believe that people are the most important thing? And if so, then I'm always looking. Early on it was, and probably part of it was because of just the nature of the job. It was like, okay, we got to hire 10 coaches this offseason. Time to go hire 10 coaches. At the end of my time there, I was always looking for a difference maker person. And so whether that, I may be at a game, maybe talking to a coach, and I may be asking questions about that individual coach to see if he could be a fit at some point, and or to say, hey, we've spent enough time together, give me a name of somebody I should have on my radar. But the idea of the sourcing, we're always looking. It's an obsession with trying to find difference maker people. And then I think the third part of that is the idea of, do I have a process? Do I have a way to increase the odds of finding what I'm looking for? Because if I'm just relying on traditional methods of, I'm going to call the references, I'm going to have a good 2-hour interview, there's too much error, in my opinion, in that process, where we're going to get tricked too often. So what are some things we can put in place to make sure that we increase our odds?
That's great. I love all those. And I think coming along with all this, having a great deal of conviction has got to be crucial, right? I mean, we live in such a world of immediate results now. You guys didn't have it initially, but you had that support. They stood behind you. Whether I look at Coach K, and I know that was, we would have never known that, but I turn on my TV screen this past Sunday, and everybody within a 60-mile, 90-mile radius of me they're done with Baker Mayfield, and then 3/4 later, 2.5 hours later, they love him, right? So how do you stay committed to those convictions, with the standard you set, the expectations that you created, especially in that culture, especially when you're not getting the desired results?
Yeah, well, I think it's so we've talked about consistency, we've talked about clarity. I think that conviction piece you're talking about, if I don't have enough clarity, I can't really have conviction. So I think sometimes that's a challenge for us. Am I clear enough on what really matters and what really are the steps? If I have that, then I can be convicted in something. I think sometimes we haven't spent enough time on the front end to be clear enough about what matters. And so we end up kind of a muddy target. We're in a fog or whatever else. It's hard to have conviction in that situation. So part of what I would say would be the work on the front end of the clarity piece. The other part of it, I think, comes down to, have I clearly defined what success really is? And am I assessing the situation as accurately as possible? I think too often we evaluate. Look, at the end of the day, well, I mean, I got fired. At the end of the day, we didn't win enough
Right.
for the long term. And I think so that matters, no question. We do this to win rings. We do that, those things are in play.
Right.
So those matter. But I think if I'm only evaluating myself on those ultimate outcomes, then I'm going to wander through the forest and be way too reactionary, as opposed to, I've got clarity on my process, on the key things that I need to be doing. And then I have a better idea, and I've defined success more accurately to say, I see the progress we're looking for. We are heading in the right direction, even though maybe that ultimate outcome isn't showing up.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing that really stuck out to me there, Kyle, was we don't spend enough time and money in some cases at the beginning when we hire somebody or bring them on board. And then we wonder 2, 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, why we're having the problems we have. So hopefully that's one thing that somebody else heard too. Transitioning over here to the World Series, right? It was just ending. There's this tradition versus new. There's probably this feel like I was all about data when I coach. And so analytics, a big part of it. We talked about Moneyball, but at what point does it become a feel thing versus that, and what goes into that process of deciding what's best for you? Like, I listen to Cash's post game because I'm weird like that. I got to listen and I got to hear. And maybe I didn't agree with it. It's easy in my recliner, right? But I knew that he had a great deal of conviction in their system. This is what they did. That's what they did all year to get him there. So I had a little bit more respect for that. So, what goes into that process though for you? Because it's not a simple decision, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think that part of what you've identified is, and this is that third piece, that process piece of, the process is the thing that we believe are the key behaviors. If we do these consistently enough, we're increasing our probability for success, right? There's no guarantees. So I want to increase my probabilities. I want to maximize my chances of this playing out the way it needs to. So have I done enough work to make sure that process is as good as it can be and continuing to evolve as I get more information? So setting the stage then for, as you talk about new versus old and tradition, and for me, at the end of the day, baseball's always used statistics. What has evolved is the quality of some of those statistics, right?
Sure.
So it's, for me, the discussion of stats or not is not really the discussion. It's the quality of information, right? And I think the best decision makers want as much quality information as possible, so that they can make the best decisions as possible based on their process in order to increase those results. I think that when we make it about numbers or not, we miss the boat. I think when we make it about, numbers is the only thing, we miss the boat, right? Numbers are a piece of information. There's other pieces of information. What do we see? What do we experience? What do we feel? What is the situation?
Yeah.
Who am I dealing with? And I think as a leader, we would talk a lot about, and it's funny because over 12 years, in Pittsburgh, we went from cutting edge, ahead of the curve on things, to behind the times on some things. And some of that's because not really knowing what's going on with that process. But I think we always tried to make sure that I want to be data informed. I don't want to be data driven. I'm not going to sell out. I'm not going to give up my responsibility in this process to just the numbers. There's other pieces of information I want to factor in.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I think part of that process too, I'd be interested in hearing, is how do you make that decision? There's the Indians approach, or kind of what you did with the Pirates, and the developmental versus there's the Marlins 1 year or 2 years, I guess they won the World Series, of just, they almost, I wonder sometimes as an Indian fan, do I want us just to go all in for that chance and then be bad for 10 years or not? Like, so how do you go about that?
Yeah, I think part of it comes down to, have I defined what is success for us on the front end? So if I've defined success as just winning a ring, which again, I think anybody in that game wants to win the ring.
Right.
But if that's my only definition of success or failure, then I may or may not do some things differently. I think the other part of it is just the realization of how much luck is involved. We can do everything perfect.
Yeah, right.
We had a 3-year stretch where we were the second best team in baseball and didn't advance past the first round, based on some luck, based on a number of different things. And I think that's the thing. One of the things that I've always appreciated about baseball is I think it mirrors life better than any other sport. It's every day. It's a ton of adversity. There's a huge component of individual one-on-one, yet also in a team context. Every day my process gets threatened. Do I stay on it? Yet the playoffs are different from that. The playoffs now all of a sudden you've got some more off days. It's a shorter window. Luck matters even more, where you can stay over 6 months, the luck's going to even out, not necessarily in a 3-week, 4-week stretch. So I think, have we defined what is success for us? And then also, in my opinion, there's nothing guaranteed. So I want to try to increase my probabilities as much as possible.
Well, the life example is great because, if you hit 30% of the time, you're in the Hall of Fame. But on the flip side, I get about parenting and this husband thing, right? 30% of the time, and that's not too successful. So that's the only thing I disagree with you on there. No, but we were talking a little bit the other day about this, like two things I'm impressed with, I guess, when it comes with professional sports, especially baseball. And the first one, and I don't think many people can relate to or understand this. But number one, for me, I'm a basketball guy, right, Kyle? So I'm a next play mentality because it's just so bang, bang. I think baseball and just professional sports, baseball, you lose that game. You have to have that next day mentality. You don't have time. Football might be a little bit longer, basketball a couple more days. But speak to that next day mentality, or just mentality in general, and also being in a profession where there is high turnover in that job based on those desired results we talked about before.
Yeah. So I think the answer to that first part, and you and I talked about, and I'm going to throw out the story because I think it captures this idea of process really good. There's the example of Brad Stevens, coach of the Celtics now, when he was at Butler. I believe it was a preseason tournament out in Hawaii. It's a back and forth tight game. Last second shot, Butler throws up, and there's a clip of Brad Stevens walking to the other bench to shake hands with the other coach, not even watching whether the shot goes in or not. And they asked him after the game about what was going on there, and his answer was along the lines of, whether that shot goes in or not should not significantly change how I evaluated how we played that game.
Right.
And I share that example for a couple of reasons, but I think one of them is that idea of that, as you're talking about that next play, the best in the world are 100% committed to the moment, right? They are able to channel everything to that moment. They're not thinking about what happened. They're not thinking about what's going to happen. They're there.
Right.
And then they're able to do that over and over and over again. We would talk about, you got 86,400 seconds in a day. How many of those moments can I show up and get a win? Sometimes that means sleep. Sometimes that means decisions on eating. Something, whatever that may be. And you're going to get losses. Can I show up for the next second and try to get a win? Not let the last second impact that one, or a future second impact that one. I think the best in the world are able to do that. And so obviously the higher you go, the more that is evident. So professional versus college, you start talking about then the best in pro ball versus an average player. They capitalize on moments more often than the other person. And so they've got some type of process that allows them to be there. They've prepared for that moment, they execute in that moment, and then they review, make sense of it so that we can then move on to the next one.
Yeah.
So I think that, like you said, in football, that's a week process to get to, where baseball, it's a 24-hour process. But if you look at the good ones, it's a play-to-play process, right? So, it's in every 5 or 6 seconds, and maybe even less, or maybe a little bit more than that, ability to make that transition.
Yeah, that's good.
And so then you project that onto working in a profession where there is high pressure, high turnover. It's the ability to stay there as much as possible and not get pulled worrying about other stuff that you don't have control over, and about stuff that either happened or are going to happen, instead of, look, I've got my opportunity. The only thing I can dominate is this moment right here, and stay there as consistently as possible.
Yeah, I love that. I love it, probably because I do preach it to my 3 boys every day with that control thing. What I control versus what I don't control. I see so many people get distracted and off track because they're worried and spending time, energy, and effort on the things they don't control. So I think it's really special what you're talking about. And speaking of special, I'd love to hear Clint Hurdle, what made him special? I mean, just from the outside looking in, I'm impressed by somebody that had a great deal amount of faith and just went about his job the right way and impacted a lot of people and was a big part of what you guys did over there.
Yeah, I think the thing that always starts with for me with Clint is the optimism, right? I mean, he came in Pittsburgh. We hadn't won at that point in, I don't know, it was 17, 18 years at the big league level, and he got people to talk about winning. He always tells the story about when he first came in and started talking about winning. People like drop their head and not look him in the eye, and he got people to start talking about winning and believing that that could happen. The other two things for me is it's a bigger than life presence, personality, engaging. I mean, he loves people. So I think he tells everybody he loves them. So, those connections I think fostered and grew, over time. And then I think the other one is there was a ton of alignment in a lot of ways of what we were trying to do that I felt like we were doing in the minor leagues, but he was able to then get done to the big league level. He wants to learn, he wants to grow, open to different things, not afraid to tell somebody he loves them. Huge belief. And a lot of that all stems from being anchored in his faith. So he and I were able to connect and align in that regard, became a foundation for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. So he wasn't Art Howe resisting Carlos Pena and some of that on you guys then with the lineups, I guess. But referencing Moneyball, but I got to think just knowing we'll wrap up here before we get to 3 pointers. We've all dealt with adversity in your life. You talked about not being with Pittsburgh anymore. I don't think it's a matter of if adversity is going to hit. It's a matter of when. Is your faith the reason that you've been able to have success moving on from that adversity? Is that kind of where it's grounded in? And can you speak to that a little bit, or if it's something different, obviously?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it. I mean, for me, it starts and ends with my faith. Not to say that I'm perfect in my execution, but that is the foundation for me. It's the foundation for what I believe. It's you know, I, people ask, you know, best book, whatever else. For me, the best book on excellence is the Bible, and it doesn't mean that I'm consistent at staying there, but the more consistent I'm staying there, the answers are there. So that the faith piece for me anchors me and allows us to truly hold fast to what really matters. Number one, what we can control. Number two,
Yeah.
and I think for a lot of us, if you're in sport, you're probably a type A personality to some extent. There's probably an element of control in you. There's probably an element of wanting to win. All those things are good. Are they channeled in the right direction? Are they handled the right way? Or is there some perspective brought to it? And for me, that is definitely the case. Can I make sense of the current situation in a bigger story? Which I think our faith allows us to do that. And for me, there was no doubt. I think there was a sense that 12 years is a long time with a professional
Yeah,
sports
for
team.
sure.
I think there was a change in regime, and I think there was a sense probably for me and my wife that there was probably going to be we were narrowing a time of transition anyway. And so it just how that happened was out of my control, but I
Right.
definitely feel like it was part of a broader plan, a bigger plan that God said at the end of the day, I want you doing something different, and so I think that anchors me for sure.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I'd just be curious in wrapping up before we get to those questions. What have you learned the most being out of the game? Is it something baseball wise? Is it something leadership wise? Now that I look at myself, I'm out of the game coaching, but I still try to pay attention. But I could probably give you 3 or 4 things that really stick out. Does that resonate with you now that you're out of the game?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like people have asked, I think one of the things because I'm wired, I'm a perfectionist. I want to try to perfect something. When I was younger, it was the perfectionism probably defined me more, where now it's more that I've embraced that journey of we're trying to perfect this thing. So the learning along the way, 98% of the things I screwed up, which were a lot of them, I was able to recognize and self-correct over those 12 years. So for me, it was less about wow, things I would have done differently, whatever else, and more a matter of by being home every day with my wife and my youngest son, um, the my personality is strong, it is dominant, and it affects them differently than it would affect guys that I worked with every day.
Right.
But what it has revealed for me is that there is still an effect. There's still that's happening, and so I think that with that realization of how that really hits, and recognizing that blunt, direct, aggressive, um, you know, even if you've got great relationships where they love you and they know where you're coming from,
Yeah.
that delivery still matters. We can get sloppy with that. So I think for me, it's been more just that realization of things I knew, but it's like neon flashing lights now when it's
Yeah.
your wife and your son.
I'm only laughing because I can relate. You pretty much just talked about me. What are you doing finally? What are you doing to continually grow as a person, Kyle?
Yeah, I think for me, I like to read. I love to read, so it's always reading. I think the other part of it is I like to connect with different people to hear different thoughts and ideas to try to make those connections. Because I think excellence is excellence; it just gets packaged differently.
Mm,
And so, trying to spend time with different people and see what makes people tick, but connecting it to a core that I very much believe in. It's not like I think where we as a society can probably get a little bit off the rails right now is everybody wants to be a learner, right? So we're just learning, we're just taking stuff in and consuming, as opposed to having a filter saying what fits, what doesn't, how does it adjust, how does it shape whatever else, make sense of it, apply it, let's move forward. So I think for me, that's where that connection piece forces me, challenges me to make sense of stuff and try to just continue to. One of the things I've tried to do, how can I keep going deeper as opposed to broader?
yeah.
And I think a lot of times we get pulled to being broader instead of no. At the end of the day, it's about the depth. It's about the nuance, because that's where excellence is, right? It's the nuance. It's the best ones. The only way you can be simple is if you've gone deep. So I
Yeah.
think some of those things are important reminders for me as I continue to try to learn and grow.
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna need to put that post-it note in front of my computer every day, right there. Hey, at the end here, I don't know how your jumper is, but maybe I'll toss up three bump setting spikes here, three pointers for you to finish. Somewhat of a rapid fire, but feel free to go a little longer if need be. Number one, if people could learn, or take away one thing from this talk, what would you want it to be?
I'd say God, for me, it's the ability to be God centered, because that puts everything else in place. I have clarity of purpose now. I can have consistency, conviction in that, and consistency off of that.
Yeah, love it, love it. Now this is number two. Time for you to hold me accountable. If Kyle could have stepped over here today in Kevin's shoes and asked Kyle a question, what question would have you asked that I did not ask today?
I've and I think we probably got to it at the end, but I think there's an element of, and you hit on it at the beginning, but building, it's one thing, it's the sustaining, or I actually don't like the word sustaining because I want us to keep building, but the longer it goes, the longer you're there, the more success you have. That process looks different than building.
Yeah, for sure. So if not the word sustaining, what would you put instead?
For me, it always comes back to how are we continuing to get better?
Yeah.
The
Okay.
journey we're on, when we're building it, we're building it. Well, once we've won, we're still building it.
That's
We're
right.
still, because again, and the whole idea of perfection doesn't bother me. I know it bothers some people, so you have to find the verbiage that works for you. But it's this idea of how are we continuing to do this better?
Love it. Final thing, good stuff's the name of this. Just something I've always said. So, what's some good stuff that you can give us here at the end? Anything that you feel is appropriate, just in general for this time?
Yeah, I think what you're doing is awesome as far as creating community for people to pour into each other, because I think this journey can get lonely. And so I think having some go-to people to keep us accountable, to support us. I think that especially as guys,
Yeah.
um, and not just on the professional side, but on the personal side, are we being the men that we need to be as we lead at home and at work?
Man, I love it. Yeah, three for three right there. You knocked them all down. Hey, where can our listeners connect? I know you're not online as much, but if they needed to connect with you in any way, and just in general with what you're doing now, give us a little insight to that, please.
Yeah, I am not a social media guy.
Yeah.
But definitely open and want to connect with people. I mean, currently right now I'm doing some consulting, helping different people, leaders, coaches, as they're on their own journey. So somebody wants to reach out and connect further, they can feel free to shoot me an email at tkstark number 8 at gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, hey, I can't thank you enough for being on here, Kyle. It was nice to get introduced to you through a mutual friend here now, and just stay in touch. I love your insight to a lot of these important topics, and I have a great deal of respect, just with your approach and the things that you've done, and I know the things that you're going to continue to do. And so, yeah, it's just stay in touch, and best of luck to you here in this process.
Pleasure was mine. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, well, hey, everybody, tons and tons of nuggets in today's episode. Look forward to hearing how you're applying these nuggets in your life. Feel free to reach out in any one of the formats that we mentioned at the beginning. Definitely look forward to hearing from you as always. Until next time, good stuff.